7 years ago, a young adventurer set out in search of the unknown on the enigmatic Mount Roraima and never returned. Amidst eternal fog, sheer walls, and legends of hidden portals, his disappearance became one of the region's greatest mysteries, leaving family and residents without answers. Before you join me on this journey, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this intriguing story. When news of the young adventurer's disappearance spread, the young adventurer's family's life was turned upside down. His parents, simple people accustomed to a quiet routine, suddenly found themselves in the midst of a seemingly endless nightmare. With each unanswered phone call, each unremarkable police report, each search that returned empty-handed, the anguish grew like a shadow that refused to go away. His sister, still a teenager at the time, had to grow up quickly. While school friends talked about parties, exams, and future plans, she carried on her shoulders the weight of an unexplained absence. It's curious how pain, when unexplained, ends up transforming into silence within the home. A silence that is not peace, but rather disguised noise. As the months passed, the family's frustration mixed with the cruel indifference of time. At first, there was a rush, search expeditions, promises from authorities, newspaper headlines, but little by little, the noise of the case faded. The family, however, couldn't move on. It was like living in a windowless room, where the air was heavy and there was no escape. The parents were torn between the hope of finding their son again and the fear of facing the worst truth. Often, they told themselves he might be hurt, lost, living hidden somewhere in the mountains. Other times, despair set in, and reality seemed to scream he might never return. This alternation between faith and despair sapped their strength day after day. Meanwhile, in the local community, stories and rumors multiplied. Some said the young man had fallen into one of Roraima's treacherous crevasses. Others spoke of indigenous rituals that had called the boy to another plane. There were even those who swore they had seen strange lights around that same time, as if the mountain guarded hidden portals. And these theories, however absurd they seemed, further fueled the family's anguish. Because when there is no body, there is no complete mourning. Without concrete clues, each rumor seemed like a small chance for hope, and at the same time, a dagger that reopened the wound. For his parents and sister, accepting that he had simply disappeared was impossible. They needed answers, even if they were painful, and it was this need that kept them standing, waiting for any sign that might change the course of this story. 7 years have passed since the young adventurer disappeared on Mount Roraima. For many, the case was just another legend woven into the region's history, one of those mysteries that time swallows without providing answers. But then, in 2023, something unexpected completely changed the course of the narrative. A group of explorers, armed with modern technology and high-precision drones, decided to map remote areas of Roraima. The initial objective was scientific, almost bureaucratic, to catalog rock formations, record aerial images, and contribute to geological studies. However, as if in a script seemingly written by fate, one of these machines captured something no one expected. The images showed a remote cliff, the kind inaccessible even to the most experienced climbers. Amid the mist shrouding the walls, the lens captured an intriguing detail: a faded object wedged between jagged rocks. Upon enlarging the image, the team realized it wasn't just a piece of rock or a shadow. It was something resembling a backpack, with visible signs of wear and tear, as if it had endured years of sun, rain, and wind. Seemingly insignificant to those unfamiliar with the story, the object carried enormous symbolic weight. For the family and those following the case, it could be the first concrete clue in more than 7 years of silence. What caught most attention, however, wasn't just the backpack. Beside it, the silhouette of a peculiar stone structure appeared. There were no official records of that rock formation, neither on previous maps nor on previous expeditions. It was as if Mount Roraima had deliberately hidden that nook all this time. Some experts, analyzing the images, suggested it could be a cave or a natural portal formed by erosion. Others went further, raising bold hypotheses about underground passages, hidden corridors, or even traces of ancient indigenous rituals. The mere existence of that structure would be enough to reignite the mystery, but its proximity to the suspicious object made the situation even more enigmatic. News of the discovery spread quickly. The media, which had barely mentioned the case, for years turned its attention to Mount Roraima. Newspaper headlines appeared, television programs devoted hours to the topic, and on social media, the discussion exploded like wildfire.
Theories were reignited. Some believed the young man had managed to survive for a time, taking refuge in that rock formation. Others maintained that the mountain held passages to unknown dimensions, and that the structure was a sort of symbolic door.
Still others were more pragmatic and said it was nothing more than a coincidence, a lost object that had nothing to do with the disappearance. But there was something no one could ignore: the marks on the backpack. The wear and tear seemed to indicate years of exposure, but at the same time, there were signs of relatively recent use, as if it had been moved or touched after the disappearance. This raised a disturbing question. Had the young man survived longer than anyone imagined? Had he wandered the mountain trying to find a way out and left that object as a kind of silent trail? These possibilities deeply affected the family. For the parents, it rekindled a spark of hope mixed with pain. For the sister, it brought back memories she had tried to bury, and with them, the almost desperate need to find the truth. Authorities, pressured by the repercussions, announced that new investigations would be conducted. Specialized teams began planning expeditions to the exact spot where the backpack had been identified. However, there was a problem. The location was difficult to access, surrounded by walls and treacherous terrain, requiring months of preparation and resources. Furthermore, cultural considerations weighed heavily. For many indigenous people in the region, the area was considered sacred, and exploration represented disrespect. This tension between science, spirituality, and mystery further heightened the aura of uncertainty surrounding the case. As experts discussed and preparations were made, rumors and theories multiplied. Some locals swore the location of the images coincided with areas known in their people's ancient stories, linked to unexplained disappearances. Others claimed to have seen strange movements there in recent years, nocturnal sounds, lights appearing and disappearing in the fog. Details that, until then, seemed mere fabrications, but which, with the discovery of the backpack, gained renewed traction. And so, like a chessboard suddenly rearranging itself, the young adventurer's case took an unexpected turn. That simple drone image, amid the wild expanse of Mount Roraima, raised more questions than answers. But at the same time, it offered the first concrete clue in years, the missing spark to reignite an investigation that seemed dormant. And of course, where there's a new clue, there's also the promise of even deeper secrets being revealed. The new clue found in 2023 completely changed the landscape. Until then, investigations into the young adventurer's disappearance had been virtually paralyzed, shelved between inconclusive reports and faded memories. But with the drone footage revealing the backpack, and the unusual rock formation, everything gained new momentum. It was as if the previously cold case had been given oxygen and suddenly rekindled the embers of collective curiosity. Local authorities, universities, mountaineering experts, and even journalists began to take action. The family, already teetering between hope and skepticism, saw in those images a reason to once again press for answers. The investigations began where they always should, revisiting the original expedition. Old maps were reopened, routes were retraced on the computer, and testimonies from the guides who worked there were collected again. Interestingly, over the years, the memories had become almost mythical. Some guides recalled strange sounds on the mountain. Others mentioned spots of denser fog, as if there were an invisible barrier. Some claimed to have noticed campfire traces in areas where no one had supposedly camped. The thing is, at the time, these signs seemed irrelevant. Now, in light of the backpack's discovery, each fragment seemed to fit into a larger puzzle. Science also entered the picture. Geologists analyzed recent images and noted that the rock formation seen by the drone didn't match any previously catalogued ones. Even more intriguing, erosion and weathering indicated that it was relatively new in geological terms, as if it had only been revealed in recent decades. This raised bold hypotheses. Had the young man found a hidden passage, opened by a landslide, or natural phenomenon? The mountaineers in turn warned that region was practically inaccessible, and only someone very determined or desperate would risk reaching that spot. Contradictions began to emerge. While some experts firmly believed it was an accident, perhaps the young man had slipped and become trapped among the rocks, others saw the possibility that he had survived longer than previously thought. The marks on the backpack weren't just from natural wear and tear, but suggested manipulation. This raised an uncomfortable question. What if he had left the object there on purpose, as a message for those who came after? Was it a call for help, or a marking of territory? Interpretations multiplied, and each new analysis seemed to open more avenues than it closed. At this point, the indigenous guides assumed a crucial role. Experts in the region, they were called upon to participate in the investigation. And it was then that ancient stories resurfaced. According to some elders, that area of the cliff had always been avoided, considered a place of passage where spirits passed between worlds. It was not uncommon to hear reports of people seeing strange lights there or hearing voices at nightfall. These accounts, previously dismissed as folklore, began to take on a new dimension. After all, who could guarantee that the discovered rock formation wasn't truly connected to ancient secrets? Meanwhile, the family followed every step. For the sister, now an adult, revisiting the story of the disappearance was a reality check. She remembered the letters her brother wrote before the expedition, full of excitement, talking about capturing never-before-seen images. Now, every detail felt like an omen. For the parents, the investigation was a mixture of hope and suffering. While they longed for answers, they deeply feared that the truth would be too harsh to bear. The press also played a curious role. Reporters from around the world arrived at Mount Roraima, turning the investigation into a spectacle. Each new detail was treated as a bombshell. Some channels explored supernatural theories, discussing portals and parallel dimensions. Others preferred a more scientific slant, discussing geological formations and extreme survival hypotheses. But, one way or another, the young man's disappearance once again became a global topic. What no one could deny was that, for the first time in years, there was a concrete trail to follow. The discoveries raised new questions that echoed like thunder. Had the young man left intentional clues? Had he found hidden passages among the rocks? Or had he been swallowed by the mountain itself, becoming yet another story lost in its eternal mists? The research didn't yield definitive answers, but it paved the way for what was to come: confrontations, revelations, and secrets that would test not only the courage of the researchers, but also the faith of everyone involved. With the new phase of the investigation, it became inevitable to hear from those who know the soul of Mount Roraima best. Indigenous guides, adventurers who braved the mountain in later years, and even foreign explorers who attempted to retrace the missing young man's route. The interviews began discreetly, but soon revealed something that deviated from the norm. Many of these accounts contained contradictions, details too curious to ignore. Some guides claimed the area near the cliff had never been explored, as if an invisible barrier kept anyone away. Others, however, claimed to have passed by and heard inexplicable sounds. Footsteps in the middle of the night, echoes of voices that didn't belong to anyone on the expedition. These testimonies sparked a mixture of fascination and fear. For some, they were proof that the place held unexplained phenomena. For others, they were mere illusions created by the fog, wind, and extreme fatigue from the journey. One foreign explorer even claimed to have seen orange lights cutting through the night on the mountainside, like torches moving in inaccessible places. When asked who might be there, he simply shrugged. There was no one, but the lights were there. This type of account, although discredited by some of the team, fired the imagination of the family and the public. But what really began to arouse suspicion were the contradictory accounts shared by guides and adventurers. One categorically stated that there had never been any trace of the young man after his last recorded stop. Another, on the other hand, mentioned seeing personal items, such as a metal water skin and scraps of cloth, at points along the trail. If this were true, why hadn't this information appeared in the original searches? Had it been ignored or, worse, hidden? This impasse cast a shadow of doubt on the veracity of everything that had been told so far. And when versions don't match, the silence of some seems to carry as much weight as the words of others. The young man's sister, now more involved in the investigation, was the one who pressed most for clarity. In conversations with veteran guides, she noticed the uncomfortable pauses, averted glances, and even nervous giggles when the subject delved too deeply. It was as if there was a line no one wanted to cross, a collective secret kept for convenience or fear. This behavior began to raise even more disturbing hypotheses. What if not everyone wanted the truth to come to light? After all, the disappearance was already part of the local imagination, fueling tourism and attracting curious onlookers. Could the community itself be hiding something? Meanwhile, the investigators pieced together each piece of history like someone gathering up fragments of glass scattered on the ground. An older indigenous guide, for example, recounted that on darker nights he had heard drums coming from the direction of the cliff. "Nobody beats drums on top of the mountain," he said, hinting at secret rituals. Another adventurer mentioned finding an unmapped trail that abruptly disappeared amid rocks and dense vegetation. Curiously, this detail coincided with ancient accounts of closing paths in the region. The tangle of versions and suspicions created a palpable tension. It was no longer just a matter of searching for physical clues, but of understanding why so many voices seemed to speak in different tones about the same story. Was it fear of the supernatural? Was it convenience? Or was someone genuinely interested in covering the young man's tracks? These doubts opened a new layer to the mystery, transforming the investigation into something more complex. It wasn't just the mountain that hid secrets, it was also the people who lived in its shadow. And this discovery made it clear that the coming revelations would bring inevitable confrontations. The investigations, which until then had been based on hypotheses and rumors, reached a boiling point. A confrontation between investigators and the local community became inevitable. As further analysis of drone footage revealed clearer details of the rock formation, it became clear that it was no simple stone. There was something structured, almost symmetrical, as if it were a hidden entrance. This discovery sparked immediate resistance from the region's indigenous people, who saw the exploration of the area as disrespectful to sacred territories. The mountain is no ordinary place. It holds secrets that don't want to be revealed, said one of the community leaders firmly. Cultural friction mingled with mystery, creating a tension that grew with each meeting. At the same time, old documents came to light, bringing a new dimension to the investigation. Records dating back decades pointed to other similar disappearances, equally unsolved. Young adventurers, scientists, and even local guides who dared to explore specific areas of Roraima simply vanished, leaving no trace. This revelation changed the weight of the case. It was no longer an isolated tragedy, but part of a frightening pattern. Mount Roraima, once a symbol of beauty and challenge, began to consolidate itself as a recurring stage for enigmas spanning generations. The team of experts, skeptical but intrigued, delved deeply into analyzing the drone footage. One particular detail caught their attention. Near the backpack, in a crevice in the rock, appeared what appeared to be a geometric mark, almost like a notch. There was no immediate natural explanation for it. Was it the result of erosion, or could it have been made by human hands? The arguments intensified. The researchers pressed for an immediate expedition to the exact spot, but local leaders warned, "Those who disturb the mountain pay the price." This phrase, repeated on numerous occasions, sounded more like a veiled threat than a simple spiritual warning. The atmosphere grew even more tense when some locals began to contradict themselves in public. A younger guide admitted in an interview that he had heard from colleagues about the existence of hidden passages used in ancient rituals. However, when pressed again, he denied everything, claiming he had mixed up the stories. This abrupt change raised suspicions of a cover-up. The protagonist of the narrative, a close family member who closely followed each revelation, began to realize that it wasn't just about discovering what happened to the young adventurer, but also about confronting forces that preferred to keep everything silent. And then came the most shocking revelation. In the enlarged drone footage, experts were able to identify something even more disturbing. Near the rock formation, at a barely discernible angle, there were marks on the ground that resembled ancient footprints, fossilized by time. Preliminary analysis suggested they might have been left not centuries ago, but relatively recently. If confirmed, these marks would indicate that someone, perhaps the missing young man himself, had been at that spot trying to cross into the mysterious structure. This discovery ignited the investigation, making it clear that the enigma was about to reach a point of no return. What had once been mere pain and longing now became a battlefield between science, spirituality, and survival. Each side maintained its version of the truth, and the investigators knew they were facing something far greater than they had imagined. With each revelation, the feeling grew that the mountain not only hid secrets, but also exacted a price from those who dared to uncover them. And that price would soon be exacted brutally when the final expedition was organized to explore the enigmatic cliff. The final expedition was organized with haste, but also with a dramatic weight that everyone felt on their shoulders. It wasn't just another climb up Mount Roraima. It was the final attempt to face head-on the enigma that consumed family members, investigators, and even the local community. Modern equipment was prepared, additional drones loaded, and indigenous guides, some reluctant, some suspicious, joined the group. The atmosphere before departure was one of anticipation and tension. The sister of the missing young man, the protagonist of this search for answers, couldn't hold back her tears as she watched the team approach the exact spot where the drone footage had revealed the backpack and the mysterious rock formation. The climb was brutal. With every step, the mountain seemed to repel intruders. Sudden downpours fell without warning, turning trails into slippery traps. The thick fog moved like a living veil, hiding and revealing sections of the cliff face as they advanced. The group had to tie ropes, climb steep sections, and sometimes hold onto exposed roots to keep from falling. Physical exhaustion was only a minor detail compared to the psychological toll that was accumulating. The constant feeling of being watched. Some team members swore they heard distant voices echoing in the fog. Others reported figures that disappeared as soon as they were looked directly at. The decisive moment came when they reached the cliff. There, in front of everyone, was what the images had shown. Scraps of fabric, rusted from years of exposure, a crushed bottle, and further on, the backpack. Touching it was almost a ritual. The sister, with trembling hands, held the object that bore unmistakable marks of her brother. Small stickers glued to the zipper, details only the family would recognize. The emotional impact was devastating. But it didn't stop there. Beside the backpack, clearer signs indicated that he had survived for some time. Fire marks, remnants of rope, even partially fossilized footprints leading toward the rocky crevice. It was at that moment that the group understood the gravity of what they were facing. The mountain wasn't just a backdrop, it was an active character in the story. The rock formation seemed like a gateway, but from it emanated an inexplicable cold, as if the air itself rejected human presence. The sister, standing before that natural portal, felt the truth weigh down like an avalanche. Her brother hadn't simply disappeared. He had arrived here, confronted something no one could explain, and perhaps had crossed an invisible line separating worlds. The shock was so great that for a few seconds, no one dared speak. It was the climax of the search. The brutal reality was before them. But along with it came an even bigger question. What had really happened at that point? The answer, harsh and relentless, was about to be revealed. The new evidence found on the cliff was enough to finally resolve the mystery that had haunted the family for 7 years. Analysis showed that the young man had survived for some time after his initial disappearance. The fire marks, the remains of rope and personal belongings confirmed that he had bravely fought to withstand the isolation and extreme conditions of the mountain. However, the evidence also revealed the inevitable tragedy. He was unable to escape. A landslide or a fall into one of the nearby crevasses appears to have been the adventurer's final fate, leaving behind only traces of his resilience and courage. The confirmation brought immense pain to his parents and sister. It was the weight of the stark truth. The adventure he had dreamed of so long had ended in eternal silence, deep within Mount Roraima. But at the same time, there was a strange relief. There was no longer a need to live in the limbo of uncertainty between hope and despair. The family could finally know that he had fought until the end, that he had not given up easily, and that his story was not in vain. The investigation ensured justice, not in the punitive sense, but in the sense of restoring the truth. The case ceased to be merely a rumor, a poorly told mystery, and took on real, documented dimensions. The young adventurer became a symbol of courage, and his memory began to inspire new generations to respect both human limitations and the mysteries of nature. The family, though torn apart by the loss, was able to put an end to years of anguish, knowing that the silence of the mountain had finally provided answers, albeit cruel ones. The end of the search brought a bittersweet mixture, relief at the revealed truth and irreparable sadness at the ultimate loss. The family, after years in a limbo of uncertainty, was finally able to say goodbye, albeit without the physical presence of the young adventurer. His sister, looking at the rescued backpack, saw more than an object worn by time. She saw a symbol of courage, of someone who dared to seek the unknown despite knowing the risks. The parents, in turn, found in the confirmation a painful but necessary respite. After all, there is no wound more cruel than eternal doubt. The legacy of the missing man, however, did not end at the cliff. His story began to be told not only as a tragedy, but as a reminder that human curiosity can overcome barriers even when the price is high. Mount Roraima continued to rise imposingly, guarding its secrets in the eternal mists, as if it had absorbed the young man into its essence. For the locals, he became part of the mountain. For his family, he became a living memory, immortalized in every old photograph and in every story that echoes like a lesson. In the end, the question is inevitable. How many mysteries still lie, hidden on that legendary peak? And how far must we go in the name of the unknown? The mountain didn't answer, but it made it clear that its voice speaks through those who dare to scale its walls. And so, the story of the young adventurer merged with the history of Mount Roraima itself, reminding everyone that the destination isn't always about finding answers, but rather becoming part of the eternal mystery.